Perhaps it's not obvious what the theist churches are. Most of us have experience with one or more theist churches, and pretty much all of us have seen those TV evangelist mega church versions. There's a lot of God talk, and especially begging for money going on with these organizations, but I mean, what is there other than that? Maybe they rail against homosexuals, abortion, birth control, and tell people who to vote for. Okay, that's good. There we go, okay. But consider Joel Osteen and his Houston megachurch. Is there any doubt that his business is in the religion business, and he's got a quote-unquote real church? And yet they said that there are no crosses or religious symbols at his services. And the title of his first book there up on the upper left, Your Best Life Now, 7 Steps to Living at Your Full Potential. Yes, there are over 1,000 mentions of God stuff in it, because I was able to find the electronic version and did a scan. And Osteen, of course, is known for his prosperity gospel shtick, where, give us money and the Lord will give you even more. But does that book title sound religious? Really? I mean, not if religious means supernaturalism. We're not there yet. The title of the book clearly refers to managing the challenges of everyday life, doesn't it? Is your best life in the here and now? What about the hereafter? I thought that's what they were all about. How is that even Christian? I mean, what is the point of finding some personal satisfaction and happiness during a space of time, even a long lifetime? That is, according to Christian doctrines, a vanishingly small, really negligible and trivial part of an unending eternity. If Christians really believe what they claim to be their most central doctrines, how could they live a middle class or even an upper class or wealthy existence while more than 3 billion people live on less than $2.50 a year? And over 1 billion people live on less than half of that. Think about that, really. It's worth ignoring all these suffering embodiments of Jesus, right? Because he said, whatever you do for the least of these, you do for me. So they're all avatars of Jesus. But they're not doing anything for him. Even though they're in such a short stay in this world, they're giving up an eternity of bliss and instead endure everlasting agony in the quote-unquote world to come. Okay, so you're not going to do that. But to return to my point, the traditional religions as they exist today are not about what they were when they got their start. And of course, those Aztec gods in that yellow box and the Hindu gods, there's the Trinity of Jesus and God the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, and all the angels around there, and then the Norse gods in that small box. I mean, there were more gods than civilizations, probably, because every civilization made at least a few dozen of them. And I've been to a Hindu temple, and they do burn stuff up, and but generally burnt offerings in sackcloth and ashes, forms of deity worship, have generally gone the way of quill pens and steamships. Deities are just not needed anymore to ensure success in looting the neighboring tribes and keeping them from looting us. Get through a drought, famine, or other disasters, notwithstanding buffoons like Pat Robertson praying away the hurricanes. The traditional religions give lip service to their theological doctrines, but as said, their alleged beliefs do not translate into dispositions to act. This is mentioned in the bulletin today. The belief is a disposition to act, because if you believe something, it affects your behavior. And yet, if all the theological claptrap is stripped away from what people reflexively take to be religion, there's still something left, including what people like Joel Osteen are selling. Dan Barker famously said that he threw out the bathwater and discovered there's no baby there. But I think he's mistaken. I think that the churches of the traditional religions today are held together by shared values and attitudes about things that have nothing to do with theology, as well as by just a common human need for community and social interaction. That's the kind of creatures we are. We're not nomadic albatross or sea turtles that hardly ever meet up with their co-species members. Anyone who goes to theist churches will see this, and that what they do talk about, share, and learn about is how to make some sense of this reality, this one life that we know. And as far as we can tell, the only life any of us will ever have, and how to meet its many challenges and difficulties. Yes, and theists drench it all in their various theological doctrines. An atheist church such as ours just leaves out all that absurd and offensive supernatural mumbo-jumbo. Of course, we'll still beg for money, and I will tell you right now today, having been to our church service now, if you go and buy a lottery ticket, it may very well pay off. So this past Friday, May 31st, was the date in 1911 that a famous ship launched into the Victoria Channel in Belfast Lough from a slipway at the Queen's Yard in the Harland and Wolff shipyard after 26 months of construction. It was then the largest man-made movable object ever constructed at a cost in today's dollars of about $166 million. I'm talking, of course, about the RMS Titanic, which just as famously, even though said to be unsinkable, went down in the North Atlantic on the night of April 14, 15, the following year. I'm sorry, the same, the following year.
When did you say it launched?
May 31st in 1911. That's
Really?
when
I thought it was the maiden voyage.
No, well, it went into the slipway and then they continued to work on it.
Oh, okay.
Put it through its exercises and so forth, and then the maiden voyage came after they checked it all out, made sure that no icebergs could possibly sink it.
It took 3 years for them to launch it after that. Wow.
So-
It took them 3 years,
Yeah.
26 months of construction,
26
and
years.
then 1912, I think, is when it went down. And so,
Oh, yeah, that's true.
less than a year after that. Anyone know what RMS stands for?
Royal.
Royal,
Yeah.
yes, you got that.
Maritime?
Royal Mail Ship.
Hampshire.
Mail ship. You may also know that the ship was built with watertight compartments, 16 of them. But did you know that the dividers between these watertight compartments did not go all the way up? So that if one filled completely, it would spill over into the adjacent ones. So much for watertight compartments, anything but. Of course, everyone knows that the ship also had too few lifeboats to carry all the passengers. But during the inquiry, it was found that this was in part because more lifeboats hung off the side of the ship gave it a cluttered appearance and blocked the view from the first class areas, so they took those away. Also, in those days, lifeboats were considered to be necessary only to transfer passengers to a rescuing ship, not to hold all the passengers and get them to dry land. The Titanic actually had more lifeboats than were required at the time. That season may also have had more than the usual amount of icebergs cattling off of Greenland due to the alignment of the sun and the moon with the Earth causing higher than usual tides. And did you know this? The Titanic had binoculars, a newfangled thing that the lookouts could not use because they were locked up. The guy with the key was dropped from the crew before the ship sailed.
With what?
Binoculars.
What did the guy do?
The guy who had the key to the place where they were locked up was dropped from the crew like the day before. So they couldn't get to the binoculars, and maybe it would have helped the lookout say, hey, look at there's an iceberg. I mean, let's ram it and see what happens. Finally, and this is by no means the last interesting fact or factoid about the Titanic, there are books with hundreds of different things. I mean, it's just been a source of unending interest. But it was only the second largest shipwreck in history. The largest was its sister ship, the RMS, what does that stand for? Royal Mail Ship, Britannic, which went down in 1916 during World War I off the coast of Greece after hitting a naval mine. Only 30 people died in that wreck, while another 1,035 were rescued. The White Star Line, which owned both ships, was compensated after the war, World War I, with the German ocean liner SS Bismarck, not to be confused with the German battleship Bismarck that was sunk in 1941 during the Second World War. Okay, now you
They gave them a ship
Yeah, they awarded them the,
because they hit a landmine.
well, because, the belligerents had to give something up. They caused all that problem, so after World War I, Germany had to be paid, so they lost the Bismarck to the White Star Line. Okay, so also on this date, June 2nd, in 1692, Bridget Bishop was the first person during the New England witch hysteria, also known as the Salem witch trials, to be put on trial. Of course, she was found guilty and condemned to death. She was hanged on June 10th. In fact, there too, ask people, how many witches did they burn at the Salem witch? Yeah, none. They were hung, and one guy was pressed to death under stones.
Well,
So that's-
0. None of them were witches.
How many witches were none, because there weren't any.
That's a better thing.
All right, okay. Now you're not gonna know what this is. Have you ever heard of Fenians? It's not some species of plant or a group of asteroids. The Fenians were Irish nationalists. Those are the people on the left. See, they're wearing green. They were active in the 19th and 20th centuries, early 20th centuries, who wanted, of course, an independent Irish republic. So on this date, June 2nd, in 1866, a force of about 800 to 1,000 armed Fenians who had crossed into Canada from Buffalo, New York, defeated Canadian forces at Ridgeway and briefly captured nearby Fort Erie. Can you imagine something like that happening today? Isn't that bizarre? How did that happen? This ambitious and heavily armed campaign was financed by Irish immigrants to the U.S. who brought Irish Republic bonds expecting to be paid back within 6 months of the recognition of Irish independence. The goal was to seize Canada's transportation network in order to force Great Britain to accede to Irish independence or lose their province of Canada. Those Irish, they were a lot worse than the Muslims, huh? It was not until 1867, the following year, that Canada began the process of increasing autonomy from the UK. And what did the US do about all this? Not much. At least nothing much to prevent it, as Great Britain did not support the Union during the just concluded American Civil War. See, take that. How's that? Better or worse than a tariff?
Irish were considered, you know,
Scum.
they were scum, so anything that the Irish were for was probably not supported by the United States.
Well, after this confrontation, armed confrontation, of course, as far as the American Civil War, remember, Britain actually aided the Confederacy and supplied them with ships and other support, though it never officially recognized it as an independent nation. In fact, no foreign government granted recognition to the Confederacy. Anyway, once this whole business was underway, don't back up, come on.
Sorry.
Don't be so hot on the key
I
there.
know.
Once underway, though, the Fenian invasion of Canada was stopped by the arrests on the American side of additional forces attempting to cross into Canada, and the American authorities also interrupted the Fenian supply lines. The U.S. government subsequently bought rail tickets to get the Fenians out of the area. How about that?
What?
They know what Fenians are.
Hey, do you know when Canada became an independent
It
country?
was the next year, 1867, that they began taking major steps to become independent. 1867, the next year, they kind of like united a bunch of their provinces. So this is our creed, or what we aspire to. Everybody agree with this? You have to swear to it on a stack of Christopher Hitchens, a stack of elements. Or maybe there's things here to disagree with. We don't mind being disagreed with. In fact, we think that progress in religion should happen the same way it happens in science, by a process of criticism, trial and error, and going with what works better. What we do require, what every single sensible person ought to require of themselves, is enough sanity to realize that beliefs, which is only where thinking leaves off, ought to be grounded in facts and reason. And as we learn more and grow in our understanding, some of our beliefs, of course, change. As I said, we should expect and welcome this, because when we change our beliefs, hopefully we're exchanging our ideas for better ones. Is there any other religion that preaches that? I don't think so. Okay, now you can hit the next slide. Well, we put the most effort into our monthly service. Each of them is different. We've had many very good ones, of which we hope today is one. We once wondered whether we'd run out of things to talk about. But after 24, 25 years, I think there's no danger of that. But please let us know how we're doing, how we might do it better. Even better, help us do it better. Don here earlier in the year said, how about a service about Ayn Rand? I said, great, and he helped us do it. It was a great presentation in April. And John Gauthier, who's our videographer here, has done several excellent pieces on logical fallacies, errors in reasoning. We have other things going on each month as well, so take a look at the bulletin. It talks about game night every Friday, salon, and Anon first Sundays of the month, which if you get there early enough, I think they put the food away at 10:30. If you get there at 10, they have made-to-order omelets and stuff like that. What does it cost, Mark, up at that?
That's 19 or 20.
Yeah, it's not cheap, but it's good. If you're hungry, have all you want.
But you don't have to buy.
But you don't have to. No, in fact, you can buy your own food. We meet in the large atrium at the Bass Pro Embassy Suites on Bass Pro Drive, just a little northwest of here. So you can bring your own eats. I've done that. Others have done that. So they don't object because it's not like a restaurant that they're mad that you're not buying their stuff. We're often there until noon or after. This is all on the back page of the bulletin, as I said. And remember, as I always say, we can always do more, but it takes people to come up with the ideas and to help us execute that. Give it some thought. This church can be a vehicle toward doing a lot of things that we don't do but could do, just needs the people and the ideas. Put your free thinking into action. Enjoy the rewards of helping to push the world in a better direction. Kit is not here yet.
Yeah,
Is she here?
Right
Oh,
behind you.
you did show up. There's no kids except me. I'm an overgrown kid. You already know that. Merlin also is helps take care of the kids when we have them. It's pretty simple to do that. It's always great to have more people who are willing to participate. Many hands make short work, but all you need to do is show the kids a good time, give them a sense of what it's like to be a free thinker. We also would always want volunteers to help in appreciating those who manage the AV equipment. Edwin Peglo, where are you at? There you are. Brought all the gear in, which got set up. John Hendricks has helped with that as well. John Gauthier, as I said, our videographer. Aaron Pelton, who's not here and hasn't been attending in a while, but is still in the background and helps us with some of the social media. He picked some things on Facebook for us a few weeks ago. So there's always lots to do, but it's very doable and very rewarding. You are this church, and I encourage you to think of how you can make use of it to do good. If you don't think the other churches are doing such a great job, help us do religion right. Advertising slogans are so cool, we can piggyback on almost all of them. This is actually mentioned in the bulletin as well. So we have a moment of science. This guy is from Turkey. I mentioned that to Dilkin, who grew up in Turkey. Herodotus was a Greek from what is now modern-day Bodrum, which is in Turkey, on the east coast of Turkey. He's known as
West.
the west coast of Turkey. Yeah. It doesn't have an east coast, does it?
No,
Sorry about that.
it's okay.
He was called the father of history, and he was first called that by the 1st century BCE Roman orator Cicero. Herodotus appears to be the first person to systematically gather information about various regions, and he was mainly interested in what was going on during the years of the Greco-Persian Wars, because he was born right around that time when it was ending. This was the 5th century BCE, and came to a close about 15 years before he was born. So he dealt with the origins and development, culture, and practices of peoples of that time. He organized them and arranged them into a narrative record called the Histories, which there's a fragment of a papyrus piece of it there on the right. Now, it turns out that there have been controversies about Herodotus and his writings. We don't know much about him, whether he got his information from personal travels or from others. Some say that he made things up. For example, when he talks about Babylon, he doesn't mention the famous Hanging Gardens, and he says there are 100 gates into the city when archaeologists think there were no more than maybe 6. There's a picture on the upper right there of the Ishtar Gate, the walls around Babylon. Herodotus also said that lion cubs claw their way out of their mothers who cannot then have any more cubs. He says there are giant ants as big as foxes whose diggings bring gold dust to the surface, and that may actually have turned out to be a species of marmot you see on the upper left there. Apparently these animals do burrow into the ground, and people in the area will go and find that there is gold dust in some of the stuff they bring up from under the surface. And it's thought that maybe Herodotus confused the word that the Persians used to refer to these animals. Herodotus repeats stories, though, about tribes of cyclopes. They're on the lower left. And talks about griffins, beasts with the back parts of lions and heads and wings of eagles as if they were real. He also described a sort of barge used in Egypt, saying that in constructing it, the builders, next slide, cut pieces of wood about 3 feet long and arranged them like bricks, fastening the boat together by running a great number of long bolts through the 3-foot pieces, and when they thus fastened the boat together, they lay cross pieces over the top, using no ribs for the sides, and within they caulk the seams with papyrus. They make one steering oar for it, which is passed through the bottom of the boat, and they have a mast of acacia and sails of papyrus. And such a boat is called a barris, but no, back up. Jeez. There was never any evidence of such a thing. So we really can't believe much of the histories, right? It's just all crazy stuff. Well, in March of this year, there we go, it was reported that archaeologists had found a sunken boat, one of many being recovered in the ancient Egyptian port city of Thonis Heracleia that was discovered back in the year 2000. Just think about that. All these years after, 2,500 years after, they're still digging up stuff. This particular boat corresponded to Herodotus' description. Damien Robinson, the director of Oxford University's Center for Maritime Archaeology, said, "It wasn't until we discovered this wreck that we realized Herodotus was right. Well, Herodotus described as what we were looking at. Herodotus describes the boat as having long internal ribs. Nobody really knew what that meant. That structure had never been seen archaeologically before. Then, we discovered this form of construction on this particular boat, and it absolutely is what Herodotus was talking about." It's insane. So this shows that the histories are 100% correct, right? I mean, he's verified, so now we can believe it all. Just like archaeology has verified the absolute truth of the Bible, right? Well, that's what the Bible worshippers say. They've compiled long lists of things that they say prove the Bible, such as these 9 from a Christian website. So they found a tomb in Israel from Roman times containing the remains of a young man who appears to have been crucified. Now they're not saying this is Jesus, obviously, but it just shows that people were being crucified, weren't just like fed to the dogs. They, were able to be, their families were able to take them down and bury them. Whoop-dee-doo. A Roman decree of the death penalty for the disturbance of graves, which corresponds to the Roman guards who fell asleep and were told, they will give you some money, and they usually say that his followers came and stole the body away. So they're guilty of grave robbing. We're not going to penalize you for falling asleep on the job. Yeah, right. Also, an ancient fishing boat in the Sea of Galilee that could have held 15 people. Just think, Jesus and the 12 apostles could have comfortably fit on board. So again, that proves the Bible, proves the New Testament. They found the Pool of Siloam, found in
Doesn't prove the whole
2004.
Bible, it just proves
We're
that
getting there,
one
we're
sentence.
getting there. We have to have some
That's
fun
the
with this
point.
verse, Logan. So the pool that Jesus told the healed blind man to go wash in John 9, right? Yeah, I mean, I've also, watched a movie, Abe Lincoln, the Vampire Slayer. It says Abe Lincoln in it. It has to be real, right? Nazareth was found to be a village in the 1st century CE, so, after around the time of Christ, people lived there supposedly. A house in Capernaum beneath the remains of a 5th century AD church that is, quote, almost certainly the very place where Jesus stayed, the home of his chief apostle Peter. Oh gosh, how can you argue with that? And also they found a stone with an inscription referring to Pontius Pilate. Mid-1st century CE ossuary, it's a little box where they keep people's bones, after they're dead, of course. They had the inscription, James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. Do you think anybody else was named James or Joseph or Jesus back in those days? And of course, the Shroud of Turin just absolutely proves the truth of the Bible. So I can tell you're all very convinced. The point is that when it comes to ancient texts, one has to be discriminating and applying what facts and reasons are available. This is true for everything. Like I said, a method of criticism. Anybody can say anything, but then you have to be willing to pick it apart. Our ability to reason makes it our responsibility to reason. And it's sin not to reason, to dismiss or discount facts and reason. The Herodotus Paris is a notable find, but it doesn't prove the existence of Cyclopean tribes or griffins any more than any archaeological finds have proven the doctrines of Christianity. Likewise, in films like, think about the latest Avengers, like I told you to go see it. They refer to all sorts of familiar people, right? New York City is in there and all that stuff. So landmarks and things. So how do we know that gamma rays don't turn you into a Hulk, or that Asgardian gods really exist? So see, we're on the side of Christians when we say that Thor is fictional. So, go ahead. So that's been your moment of science. So our presentation on belief. I had a lot of fun doing this. It was a lot of work, but very interesting. A ton of material, way more than I could include in 10 services. So our culture, don't advance yet. Our culture puts an enormous emphasis on belief. This month's bulletin points this out. This is undoubtedly related to the most deep-rooted beliefs, which are obviously religious beliefs in the supernatural. But such belief is today just a small part of it all, as we discussed, and also in the bulletin. We'll get into that shortly. So next slide. Yeah, one has to laugh at those who sometimes ask, what can explain the persistent belief in gods? But one might as well ask why language persists. It's because it is passed on from generation to generation and serves some purpose. Though many religions, like many languages, have become extinct, and the ones that survive can and do change greatly over time. It certainly isn't the case that belief in gods have been widespread and persistent, that is somehow evidence that gods actually exist. After all, there's widespread folklore regarding vampires that span the globe in all of history. Lots of cultures believe in that. So if there's a God-sized hole in the brain, there must also be a vampire-sized hole in your brain, too. Lots of cultures throughout history have traditions of there being vampires. There's no evidence that the undead are real. What is true and quite interesting is that human brains do tend to create the same fictions over and over again. We can expect to learn more about this as very smart people continue to study it. Next slide. Belief is a very interesting idea. The word can be used in various ways. You can say, I believe I'll have another beer, right? Or I believe in you. You can do it. But for our purposes today, we'll take it to mean, as most people do, that some statement, some proposition is true or corresponds to reality or, quote unquote, the way things really are. Such propositions can be most anything from God, or someone's conception of God, everybody has a different one. God exists, to you're discombobulated spirit, and so on. Next slide. Religious belief can be thought of as any belief relating to religious questions, quote unquote. And since the parting of the ways of science and religion during the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, religion can only be properly thought of as all those things that are not yet anyway, who knows what the future may bring, not, as I say, science. And since science has to do with intersubjective or objective perceptions, things that we can see, hear, touch, or otherwise perceive with our senses that don't depend on who does the perceiving, things that we can even build machines to perceive for us, including things that we can only perceive with instruments or technology, that leaves legitimate religious belief as having to do with the inner world of private, personal, subjective experience of how it feels to be who we are. It doesn't have to do with how old the earth is, whether evolution happened, the beginning of the universe, blah, 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 all these things that religious people want to horn in on. But notice that authentic religious beliefs about one's own internal experiences may be irrational, so we can't really complain about religious beliefs being irrational. So, for example, there's little or no rational justification to believe that chocolate tastes better than vanilla, but I can assert that and be completely right and you're all wrong. And the next week I might get tired of chocolate and then the opposite will be the case, and there's nothing wrong with that. But so long as people are not insisting that their beliefs are true for everyone as a matter of objective fact, how can you object? Instead, rather, it's kind of interesting to share. What's true for you, what's true for me. Ayn Rand famously objected to that, but there are things that are true for you and not true and so on. But this is not what most people mean when they think of or talk about religious belief. What they mean is some body of supernatural doctrines that seem to uniformly take the following form. Next slide. I think this is original with me. I've never really seen any, and I've read a lot of stuff about religion and Freethought and stuff, but think about it. All the world's supernatural religions come down to these things. That humans consist of a material body and an immaterial or supernatural indestructible soul. And then when the body dies, the soul goes somewhere, either a good place, which may be heaven or reincarnation into a pleasant life, or it goes to a bad place, which may be hell or reincarnation as a beetle or something like that. Also, a set of rules would typically include at least some acceptable moral principles. You know, it's wrong to kill, but then it's also wrong to eat a cow or a pig. But also these arbitrary requirements, do's and don'ts, and of course these rules determine or influence where the soul goes upon death, and may also impact your happiness during life. Next slide. Then, these rules in the entire system have been set up or at least overseen by one or more immaterial supernatural beings, deities that one must please by believing in their reality and or obeying the rules. Number 5, these things are known to be absolutely true. Why? Because they're communicated to people and sometimes still communicated to people by revelations from the aforesaid deities or their agents. And of course they wouldn't lie, they could not be mistaken. And lastly, none of these things can be detected, measured, verified, or falsified in any way. No sense in arguing about it because they got it all stacked up in their favor. So here's a good book, short one. Oh, wait a second. Pages stick together sometimes. Yeah, so anyway, back up to that previous slide. So, okay, so these 6 points, right? Did I leave anything out? Isn't that pretty much the essence of all religions? You just fill in the blanks with different versions of it? I think this is cool. I never saw anybody come up with that before. Of course, the problem is that this immaterial supernatural business, because it's a kind of a substitute for science. We're asked to accept, or it's actually insisted that we accept that these things exist that supposedly lie outside of ourselves, just like objective reality, but are not a part of objective reality because you can't observe or test them in any way. Can't check it out. Indeed, to even try to test such assertions is often said by believers to be an offense against the supernatural power. You want to question that God's going to be offended. Now, we freethinkers know that there's a whole body of thought to explain how belief in the supernatural came about and how and why it is sustained. So these days it seems to be, as the saying goes, a mile wide and an inch deep. Even some of the most apparently committed believers in these things rely on modern technology, including medical science. They resort to prayer only as an adjunct or when science has nothing to offer. Yet there are not even any scientific studies showing the effectiveness of prayer. In fact, all the studies that have been done credibly show that it doesn't have any effect at all. So next slide. And this, I'm going to suggest you get this book. This is a very good book, short one, only 144 pages, which goes into why people are so susceptible to supernatural ideas. Next slide is an example. I remember this book talks about. Look at those little babies at the top, right? Pick me up, mommy, Bobby, pick me up. My oldest daughter always did that. Uppy me. Looks a lot like the people on the bottom, doesn't it? Among other things, this book discusses this. It is pretty well established that the human species owes its existence to a degree of what's called paedomorphosis. There's a good word. Always learn new words here. As a result of neoteny or heterochrony. Those are good words too. If you don't learn anything else today, those words. Next, they're up at the top there. So you see how they're spelled. You can look on it. The idea is the retention of juvenile features in the adult because of an altered pace of maturation, of course caused by genetic mutations. So we're all who we are because we're overgrown children. But that doesn't mean we have to believe in Santa Claus. Next slide.
So what do those mean? What do those?
Well, in other words, paedomorphosis is the paedo like pediatrics, morphosis, the form. So the retention of juvenile features in the adult form. Neoteny, a new way of development, and heterochrony meaning changes, the hetero, like differences in chrony time. The developmental process is altered in terms of what happens when. So we think that's also why babies are born with great big heads, right? They're speeded up, and like I say, at the bottom there's just one example of these people live. They're basically all like little babies saying, "Uppy me, uppy me." Nothing wrong with that, but you know that's what they're doing. So next slide. So much more to believe than the supernatural theological beliefs that we reject and find so objectionable and offensive. Again, read the bulletin, which points out that our society and culture is now saturated with messages aimed at getting us to believe in various things and thereby control or influence our behavior. What you believe is very, very important to other people who stand to gain or lose from whether you believe it or not. Some beliefs are more central than others. Many beliefs are basically background beliefs that we hardly ever think of. So, for example, that we in the world that we experience actually exist. We're not the only mind in existence, with everyone and everything else being a dream or a fantasy. The word for that is solipsism. I think a lot of you have heard that term. We're not a brain in a vat. Reality is not being fed to us by an outside source, as in the iconic Matrix films. These are not things that we can know for sure or even justify, but we just believe them. They're background, and you almost can't question them, not because they're dogma, but because it doesn't make any sense to talk about anything else unless you do accept that reality exists. It is an example that can't be questioned without calling into question pretty much everything. Some beliefs are also what we consider implicit. We may or may not be somewhat aware of them, but in some sense we cannot help but have them, though perhaps we can change them over time. If I drop a snake in your lap, I'm pretty certain that you would respond with alarm because of your implicit belief that snakes are dangerous, even if I dropped only a plastic snake in your lap or it was a harmless species of snake. That's why that would be a practical joke, right? Which only works because of the belief that the person had.
Right, if you dropped a kitten,
Right.
you wouldn't be.
You wouldn't react with such alarm, right? Or a ball, you know, something harmless. So there are other implicit beliefs that are not so innocent. Psychologists have been studying these by, for example, showing subjects pictures of people and asking them about the people in the pictures. Can you imagine doing this study? Would you participate in the study? They give you some pictures and they ask you to tell you all about that person. Ask you to be like Sherlock Holmes. They're dressed this way or whatever. I don't know what, you know, but what they're really testing is, what are your implicit beliefs? Is it slightly amazing that people do this? And disturbingly, in one recent report, it was found that pictures of women simply holding a beer are judged to be more sexually available. Yeah. Other tests purport to be able to detect subtle biases having to do with skin color and other traits, where they test your ability to discriminate between different words and colors and so forth. Then there are some involuntary beliefs that people not only can't help, but beliefs seem to be due to some sort of neural malfunction. These are delusional beliefs, and some of them hint at how our brains work, how our brains form and maintain beliefs, and how things in our experience may get tagged as something I believe or not. So I can mention any number of things. Beijing is the capital of China, which you weren't thinking about up till now. Your brain tags that, yeah, that's true. If I said Shanghai is the capital of China, Or New York is the capital of India, boom, your brain does not, recognizes that as not something you believe. So it's kind of interesting. Delusional beliefs can be implausible to the point of bizarre, such as Cotard syndrome, where people believe that they do not exist or are actually dead. Similarly, Capgras delusion is the belief that a close friend or family member has been replaced by an identical imposter. Kind of makes you think of the invasion of the body snatchers. Maybe somebody heard about that and wrote that story. I forget who that was that wrote the invasion of the body snatchers. Oh, darn it.
That's actually a condition that people.
Yes, it's called Capgras delusion. The belief that some close family member, somebody they know, has been replaced by an imposter. Other delusions are that one's mind is being controlled by outside forces, or that one is someone else, a deity, or as the famous mathematician John Nash, the guy who was featured in Beautiful Mind, that he asserted that at one point during his mental illness that he was the left foot of God.
It turns cold.
Some delusions can be plausible but demonstrably false, such as someone thinking that their spouse is cheating on them, or that they are under police surveillance, and so on. There's a huge subject of study in this, and speculation as to how people can come to believe these things. The delusions are reproduced, from person to person. I mean, there could be Capgras or Cotard delusion unless it's described in multiple people. But how they come to believe these things and be unable even to doubt them, we haven't yet unraveled. So next slide. Another interesting thing about belief is the many ways with which it can be considered. Already mentioned is the neurology of belief, how our brains form and maintain beliefs, and sometimes go off the rails. But as mentioned, these things can happen, or how they happen and the forms they take are clues. Also already referred to as the psychology of belief in the context of implicit beliefs, or what we may call biases. But there's a lot more to it even than that, such as, for example, studies where a subject is put in a room with others who are actually confederates of the experimenters. Okay, so you're in there, you're the subject, there's 20 other people, and they're all hirelings of the experimenters. Then they show you some lines, and they say which one is longer, and all the confederates say, oh, that one's longer, even though it's obviously the shorter one. And guess what? They can make people agree. And study subjects, they can make them agree with that. Haven't really drilled down into how that happens. Do they really, if they later will continue to agree? And as alluded to in the bulletin, people who make their living in marketing, public relations, politics, and many other fields are aware of and exploit a multitude of ways in which people's beliefs can be manipulated. And let's keep this in mind. None of us, no one is immune to such methods, no matter how much you may want to believe that you're an independent thinker and you form your beliefs entirely on the basis of facts and reason. No, you're susceptible to it too. Remember last time we talked about holding a warm drink versus a cold drink could influence people's thinking? Well, here's a related tidbit. Next slide. When music accompanies the communication of religious, social, or political assertions, the ideas conveyed are perceived to have more gravitas and credibility. The events and associated ideas and beliefs are highlighted and made special by the music, but there's no evidence for an interaction between music and delusional beliefs. Instead, music interacts powerfully with commonplace beliefs that entail a continuum of certainty. Because music has a unique capacity to initiate and shape emotions, behavior, and attitudes, it has an especially forceful impact on implicit beliefs. Now that's from a 2014 book called Music in the Social and Behavioral Sciences, an encyclopedia. I invite you, next time you see an ad, or even a movie or TV show, when they're playing appropriate music, you realize what the appropriate music. Imagine what the impact would be without that sound. Turn off the sound and watch it. See if it's as good. Or consider how it might affect you differently if the accompanying music was, say, a rousing chorus of The Farmer in the Dell, or Old MacDonald Had a Farm, right? Instead of the stirring, ooh, Game of Thrones, wonderful things are happening, and or Star Wars music. Next one. The phenomenology of belief is yet another way of considering belief. This time from the standpoint of your own subjective experience of it. In other words, what is it like to believe something? What is it like to doubt beliefs? What are the qualia? You'll have to check the February bulletin to learn about that word. The idea is the things that cannot be subsumed in science. They're your personal subjective impressions. Especially, what is the qualia connected to the realization that a belief is mistaken and must be replaced by another belief? It's not something you decide, is it? It's kind of like, boom, eureka. And it's a good feeling, too, for the most part. Freethinkers, if anyone, should appreciate that beliefs should not be considered like body parts that we're so attached to them that we have to defend them at all costs. Of course, it depends on the belief, but most of our beliefs should be held in such a way that we can consider whether they're really true or are at least whether they're the best beliefs. How else could we ever give up a belief for a better one? And isn't that what we should be striving to do? How else could any of us have gone from the many silly things we may have believed in the past to what we hold is a better way of seeing things now? Almost all of us have been on a journey of getting to where we're at now, and hopefully that journey is not over, won't be over for a long time. How else will we ever improve our understanding of ourselves or anything else unless we realize that beliefs are, in a sense, only parking spots for thinking, which is the really important thing, which is why we call our church a church of Freethought. That's why we said from the beginning, earliest days of the NTCOF, that you can't believe when you're thinking. But when you're truly thinking about something, you're considering all sorts of things that may be at odds with the relevant beliefs. Thinking is about getting from one place to another, even if often you can't get there from here. That is to say, we get nowhere with our thinking. Sometimes that happens too. It's just as true that you can't think when you're believing, because so long as you're focused on what you believe, your thinking may amount to little more than rationalizing the belief. We don't want to be doing that. Confirmation bias, how many have heard of that? Pretty much everybody? Yeah, well, some people. That's where you go through life and everything you see tends to confirm what you already believe. Even scientists do that. They're only human. They look for ways to verify their hypotheses, and then they're surprised. They may even reject results that are at odds with them. We got to do that one over, we're not going to report that. No. Negative results. I think we can, though, try to turn this around and engage in disconfirmation bias. Let's try to do that more by looking for things that are not consistent with our beliefs. None of this is to say that abandoning one belief for another is always a good thing, or even that we should always try to do so, but it means that we should try to be open, that we should be willing to doubt in all things and definitely jump at the chance to give up any belief for a better one. In some ways, and this has been said before here, there's really no need to believe anything as such. It's sufficient that one's beliefs amount to, that you heard this, read it in a book. I mean, how do you know Beijing is the capital of China? Have you ever been there? You know it from newspapers, from geography books, and so on. Or even, I saw this or that happen, even if you do have first-hand experience. That's your experience. This way of experiencing what we call belief leaves a wider opportunity to learn new things and to grow through thought into better beliefs. And that's the real core of the religion of freethinkers. We can all talk about what we believe, but what binds us together is a conviction that how we form and maintain our beliefs in this phenomenological, experiential sense, that is really what is important. And this finally brings us to another, perhaps the most vital aspect of belief, which is the ethics of belief. Thomas Jefferson famously said, next slide, "It does me no injury for my neighbor to say there are 20 gods or no God. It neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg." And we hear this today from people who criticize atheists. Why do you even care about people believing God? Why are you trying to take away their belief? Well, it's not that simple. We can agree with Jefferson, which the context of his statement here was his saying that the laws of the government cannot hold people accountable for, as Jefferson put it, operations of the mind. Right? What was it called in 1984? A thought crime. And certainly Jefferson was right to say in the sentence preceding this one that this was the point that legitimate powers of government extend only to such acts as are injurious to others. Otherwise, go ahead and believe in as many gods as you want. On the other hand, given that beliefs are dispositions to act, and that idea did not come up until long after the death of Thomas Jefferson, beliefs are still important from a moral point of view. In his famous essay of 1877 entitled The Ethics of Belief, the British mathematician and philosopher William Kingdon Clifford discussed the hypothetical example of a ship owner who had reason to doubt that his ship might not be seaworthy. But the ship owner suppressed his doubts in the prospect of an expensive refitting of the vessel, and so he, quote, acquired a sincere and comfortable conviction that his vessel was thoroughly safe. So he sincerely believed it was safe. The ship owner then watched her departure with a light heart and benevolent wishes for the success of the passengers, and he got his insurance money when she went down in mid-ocean and told no tales. Clifford made the point that the ship owner had no right to believe on such evidence as was before him, even though he convinced himself, as many people convince themselves of things they believe. And Clifford clearly meant by no right to mean no moral right. Okay? Clifford even considered that. Suppose the ship was seaworthy after all, but he subsequently made many, and that the ship subsequently made many safe voyages, the ship owner would still be in the wrong for suppressing reasonable doubt about his safety. He should get it checked out. Now, I'm not a legal scholar or historian, well, I did talk about this a bit with my brother, who's an attorney. And this whole idea kind of figures into the law. It's a huge subject, actually. But in our times, for example, someone can be convicted of a crime or lose a civil cause of action, not just because of what they do or believe to be true, but what they should have known or believed to be the case. In addition to ignorance of the law is no excuse, there are some things you should know if you're going to do things. So we'll see how that plays out in the case of the 737 MAX Boeing's plane. In other words, we should have come to understand that some legitimate powers of government do extend to operations of the mind, and this also comes up in the context of hate crimes, right? A crime is a crime, but when it's motivated by hatred, malevolent beliefs about a class of persons, not just, I hate this guy, so I'm going to kill him. Hate crime, animus against classes of people, of identifiable people, that the perpetrator, in that case, the perpetrator is a greater danger to society. Not only that, but crimes like that have a wider effect because they create fear in and effectively terrorize all members of the class of persons in question. Just like lynchings did that. They put people in their place, so to speak. That was their intent. So these are the considerations that led Clifford to come up with what I think we all and all thinking people should agree with, that it is wrong, always, everywhere, and for anyone to believe anything upon insufficient evidence. Now we can pick this apart. What is sufficient evidence? All of that. This is a term Clifford's credo. This is definitely what Freethought is all about, isn't it? Isn't it? Do any of us believe things upon insufficient evidence? Of course we do. But we should and do strive against this. An ideal that no one is absolutely and completely in compliance with is not an ideal worth having. Clifford addresses those who say that they have not enough time and energy to be certain of each and every belief they have, and his answer is, then you should have no time to believe. You don't have the time and inclination to check things out. And we have to be careful too in this day and age, social media sharing things that may or may not be true. And if you don't, it's perfectly okay to pass things along. If you don't want to check it out, at least say, I got this, could it be true? In other words, as previously said, when there's reason for doubt, which is almost always, even if it's on Snopes, you can even doubt their stuff, believe it or not. You can always withhold judgment and simply have in mind that such and such may be the case, or that many people appear to have such and such a belief, and so on. Clifford's essay, well worth reading, and it's available for free online. It was 1877. Classic and important work for people like us. Clifford was certainly not the first to make a connection between morality and beliefs, though. 17 years earlier, the British scientist T.H. Huxley, he was born in 1825 and lived to 1895, so entirely within the 19th century. He was an atheist, and he was the person who coined the term agnosticism. Well, he lost his 4-year-old son to pneumonia. And the Anglican cleric Charles Kingsley, which apparently was an acquaintance of Huxley's, wrote him a conciliatory, sympathetic letter, to which Huxley responded by forcefully rejecting the comforts of supernaturalism, saying, the longer I live, the more obvious it is to me that the most sacred act of a man's life is to say and to feel, and it doesn't have to be man, but it can be a woman too, I believe such and such to be true. All the greatest rewards and all the heaviest penalties of existence cling about that act. I know what I mean when I say I believe in the law of the inverse squares, and I will not rest my life and my hopes upon weaker convictions. I dare not if I would. This too can be taken as another way of stating that core element of the religion of freethinkers. So please think about that. How about questions or discussion? Where did I go off the rails? Where was that wrong? Anything come to mind? All learn something? I had a lot of fun going through this.
I might have rethought about the hate crime thing.
Yeah, I mean, there are people that say it should be a special thing for a hate crime, but you have to really kind of think it through.
It's a really
Yeah,
tough area.
yeah. Like somebody that goes in and shoots up a school, I mean, that terrorizes school children all over the country. So, really the victims are wider than just the actual gunshot.
It's interesting when you make the point about lynching, because the question is whether it is an act which is not if it's an act which is not simply to kill the person, but in order to terrorize a whole class of people. So the question is, what else is there like that? What type of crime is like that, and does it deserve its own category? That's a big question, because I'm definitely someone who doesn't believe hate crime. If you take it to its logical extreme, it's actually penalizing thought as opposed to penalizing action. But in the context of lynching, I could see where the crime is not necessarily the murder, but something different. So,
Meant to intimidate a whole bunch of people. Think of what goes on in Muslim countries where if somebody says something questionable about Muhammad or something, they go after that person and condemn them to death and so forth. Well, what's the point of that? It's to instill fear in the rest of the population. You better not say anything like that. You're gonna get it. So it may be a thought crime, but on the other hand, the crime of going after the person who's got the thought crime is a way of trying to control the beliefs of the whole population and muzzle their ability to speak up and speak their mind.
so does that then, I guess it makes me think differently about crimes like, against homosexuals, where, a homosexual is murdered and displayed in a public manner, have the body displayed in a public manner, like what happened to Matthew Shepard. Then the question is, should the trial be for simply a murder, or should the trial be for some sort of terrorism?
Of course, when they label the hate crime, I don't think that they set it aside as a separate crime, but they call it a hate crime because it can affect sentencing, what you're going to do about it.
Right.
And I think Edwin actually has brought up that we should have an idea of what we're going to do if somebody bursts in the back door with a AK-47. Throw a chair at them. Anybody has a gun, maybe shoot back.
Oh,
And why did he bring that up? Because of Muslims. Mosques being shot up. Or there have been some Christian churches too, somebody goes in to shoot up a church. Well, we're a church, so anytime a church is shot up, that's kind of like, puts a little fear in us too, just because we get together to talk about what we agree about, what our opinions are about religious questions. That's going to open us up to some mad gunman who just wants to come in and kill the people that he doesn't agree with how we think.
Thought of that. We're a bigger target because of, we're atheistic.
Yeah,
So that some whack job Christian could do it.
yeah. I mean, look at, open Muslims are being elected to Congress, but hardly, if you're an open atheist, I think is there an open atheist now in Congress? I think there's one. There was another one who retired. But yeah, we're kind of a hated minority, and I do intend to address some of this, as we have in the past too. How does a hated minority get through life? Especially you might have a boss who's a Christian fundamentalist who hates atheists. What are you going to do?
Be quiet.
Yeah, be quiet. But there are some ways to express that. One thing I found is if somebody asks whether I'm an atheist, is they'll read my patients will read the paper or something and look me up and discover this, and I'll say, well, I'm a doubter. Don't you doubt some of the things that that the religions teach?
Part of the
You
problem.
can't get people all the way to atheism, in other words. You can't get them all the way there. Start with where they're at. And what did it start with for us? Doubt.
Part of the problem is a lot of religious people don't understand atheism. They think it's, we hate God or we work against.
Right. We're devil worshippers.
Yeah.
Well, of course, they believe what they've been taught by their preachers.
So they've been taught.
Yeah, or even, I was taught by the nuns as a kid that if a drop of holy water fell on an atheist, that it would burn them, scald them, just like, fire.
you're talking about witchcraft trial or something?
Yeah,
Something like that.
yeah, right.
They drop
Throw them in water and see whether they sink or they
sacred
float.
water or just,
Right.
because I take shower and I don't get burned.
Yeah, but it's not holy water.
That's exactly what I'm
If the
saying.
Pope snuck into your house and blessed your water heater, then maybe you would burn up.
There's no such thing as holy water, though.
All water is just
That's
water.
what you think. Ask a believer. They have all kinds of imaginary
Yeah,
stuff.
where the piece of bread is actually the, the flesh of Christ.
Blood of
I mean, the
Christ.
appearance. Yeah, the Protestants had a lot of fun with that, daring the Catholic priest to eat an arsenic or botulism-laced piece of bread that's been consecrated.
What bothers me is once they say, I believe, that means you should stop everything.
Yeah.
You cannot break that barrier.
Yeah, you
Period.
can't have any doubts.
They
after
can
that.
attack you all they want, but you cannot, you cannot talk to me that way because I believe. So you're supposed to not criticize, not ask questions, not show doubt,
No
nothing,
no discussion.
nothing.
Can't be
It's just
reasonable.
a big wall, a big
Well,
block.
Peter Bergassi, who wrote this book, How to Make Atheists, talks about being a street corner epistemologist. And it's not confrontation, but in other words, people that say, well, I just believe it, go ahead and ask them and say, I'm just curious why you believe it.
Because God
or-
said so.
Or in my case, we had a discussion with one of the kids' relatives, well, that's what I believe. But I said, well, I used to believe that too, but here's the problems I have with it. So I'm not attacking their
Right.
belief, just saying,
Right.
this is what
Right.
bothers me
Yeah.
about it. And he actually wound up saying, well, my belief is, it's just my insurance policy. Actually admitted to having taken Pascal's wager, not realizing, and of course, at that, I wasn't gonna delve into it further, but that can be picked apart. How do you know you've made the right wager?
What I was
Next,
told
you're gonna die and then wake up as a beetle and you'll realize the Hindus were right.
years and years ago, I didn't know about Pascal's wager at that time. People tried to use it on me. What if? What if it's true? What do you lose? What do you have to lose for believing? Believe anyway, so that you don't, just in case.
Right.
And it's like, just in case, I'm gonna change my whole life for just in case?
Well, not only that, but a person who subscribes to Pascal Wager tells me that they don't even understand the nature of their own belief.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And if everybody wagers about the God that they believe in, how do they know they got the right God? I think Robert Heinlein, the science fiction author, wrote some kind of book, or maybe it was a short story about how whatever religion you believe in, when you die, that's where you go. It's all personalized for you.
So that's really the comeback, that's the response to Pascal's wager is, okay, if that's true, there's thought that, if you eat, a pig, then you're gonna go to hell. Well, shouldn't you just not eat pig just on the off chance that that might be true? But people don't take it to that level of abstraction.
Yeah, here's my argument's gonna be, well, it's been a little bit, but what if the other one is true?
Yeah.
What if that one is true? Which one is it? No, mine is true. But that's what you're saying, the other guy says the other thing. That guy says the other thing. No, they're all wrong. But that's what they say about you. Just like you do not believe in their God, they don't believe in your God.
Yep.
So which one I go to? No, come to mine.
Well,
And I
just
said,
on the
okay,
off
I said-
chance that I might be right.
I said, okay, well, I have a question, I have a question about your belief. I know that your book says, Bible says, if, the book says kill gays or kill people who don't believe in you. I should now, if I believe in your Bible, should I kill them? Do you kill them? No, we don't apply that. That part doesn't apply. What is it then? Can I go pick and choose what I want to believe?
I really like it when I point out, like I said earlier, the people who are wealthy, who are Christian, can you make sense of that? They're not doing what Jesus did. You know what their comeback is? They say, well, that thing where Jesus said to sell all you have and gave to the poor, that was addressed just to that one guy who was asking what you have to do to be saved. It's like, what?
Because he,
Then everything Jesus said was to people that lived at the time. It was only for them, it's not for us, right?
And another thing I asked, for example, my friend made a lot of money, and I said, your religion says that you should give 1/10 of your income to your church. So do you believe before taxes or after taxes? And she was like, if you're making 10,000 a month, are you giving 1,000 to the church every month? Every week you give 500 to the plate? Well, that's not like that. It's not like that. I said, okay, we're wearing. This is not like that, and I don't believe that. So I see we're making holes in your belief now. You don't believe in giving money to church, 1/10 of your income. You don't believe in that. You don't believe that people should. And your church, I read, what was that? Crossroads Church on Grand Prairie, in Grand Prairie on 360. She was going to that church. One day, she kept telling me, "Why don't you come with me on Sundays?" I said, "Well, just come to the church. Don't believe or anything. I don't want to go along." I said, "I'm not like you. I don't do the things that I don't believe in." Why would she kept saying, "My friend"? And finally, I said, "That church website says gays should be killed. Do you believe in that? Do you want to kill gays?" She suddenly said, "Don't tell me any of it." I said, "Why not?" "Because I'm happy now. I don't want to know." I'm happy, I don't want to know. Won't tell
Ignorance
me.
is bliss.
Let me just ask, this is a great segue to the next slide.
Okay.
But let me just ask, how many of you all experience belief as something that is voluntary, that you can just decide to believe in something?
And all of them.
Do you experience it that way?
Oh, I don't voluntarily believe it.
I don't find that I
Voluntarily
have the
believe
ability
something?
to say, I'm gonna believe this. It's kind of like I have to believe certain things based on, just the weight of the
Even-
evidence. It may be secondhand or third-hand evidence, but.
Even to
like-
the
like-
law of my
like
parents, I
Herodotus-
wouldn't believe.
like
unless I
Herodotus
should
Barrus.
see a proof.
Do I believe that they dug this ship, recovered this ship and that it corresponds? Because I don't have any reason to doubt it, I'm sort of have to believe in it, and at least in the sense that this is what people are saying. I mean, what is there to object to? They're not saying, we found a griffin, we found a race, a tribe of cyclops.
That's different beliefs. There's, almost all beliefs are choice, but on deep psychological, you're,
Yeah, well, when it gets to the implicit
Right.
background beliefs and things like that, but I'm just saying, when believers say you should believe like Pascal's wager, I just don't experience belief as being something I can choose. It's sort of more forced upon me.
not unconsciously.
It's more like having confidence. For instance, if you're fishing, when I'm fishing, I have confidence, there's always shallow water bass, okay?
Well, just like you
Not very
said,
many, but there are.
that's what we use to believe in that sense. I believe I'm gonna catch fish today.
I have
That means I
confidence.
have confidence in it.
That's
But
true.
is it really,
But with
that
confidence,
he, is it
it's
really
really-
that he believes there's shallow water bass, or that he has no reason to doubt that there are?
Ah,
He's confident there are.
See, maybe a belief is in some sense, or there are, at least some beliefs are more of a sense of, well, there's no good reason to doubt, no compelling reason to doubt, and so, you're
It's
gonna kinda go with it.
Or it's percentages, high percentage belief.
Right.
I'm gonna
But
research.
if you had never caught a shallow water bass,
Then you figure out.
how would you, on what basis would you believe it? Is because someone else that you
Someone else.
trust?
Well,
Said it.
look at it this way, I mean, what would it take for somebody to convince you that science was not the best way to determine objective reality?
I
What would it
say,
take?
prove it.
That'd be a tough thing, considering its long provenance and, the whole process of trial and error that science has employed just creates a high degree of reliability, not 100%, but the other thing is in science, people are allowed to criticize. I mean, that's what's cool about going to a science.
No, not about
They can
specific-
argue with each other, you're wrong, the way you should have done it was this way. You would never gonna see that within a religious sect.
Well, then I've been saying not about,
Between religious sects, yes, but.
You're not
religion-
allowed to discuss it in
None
church.
of the, none of
where
the,
you
none of
go
the
and
individual
listen.
religions or so-called faiths makes any progress on the basis of, internal
the
criticism.
scientific process encourages you to question certain scientific things that are established
Right.
as scientific fact, right? But
Yeah.
not science itself.
Right. Well, now, what if you went to a lake and you were gonna fish for shallow water bass, and somebody came along and said, the Department of Natural Resources was here a month ago, and they collected eDNA. Remember, we had that little moment of science about environmental DNA? Yeah, they collected stuff from this lake, and they said, no, there are no shallow water bass here in this lake.
Here's the thing about beliefs.
That'd be pretty good, because if they can't detect the DNA of these fish that are pooping and peeing and, you know, pieces of them shedding in the water, which you should be able to find it, there's not, I'd probably go to another lake, wouldn't you?
Or look for the deep part.
Yeah,
Right.
look for the deep part.
Deep water.
But the thing about beliefs, there is no belief that's 100%. It's all percentages. Some beliefs, 60%, some are 70, some
How do you know,
are
I've heard that said before, but how do you know the percentages?
80. You don't know, but I mean, it's how much you believe.
Maybe kind of high confidence and low confidence.
That's the word confidence, yeah.
Uh,
On scientific stuff, you're 99.9,
Yeah,
and then on different things, you're 75, 80.
Right.
Like
We're past
fish,
we're
easy.
past 11:30, is anybody needing to go at another engagement? This is great discussion.
The problem with.
I thank you for your talking about the timing and stuff. Let's have the next slide, because you can't click down.
Bring it.